the Imperium of Man. For 10,000 years it has endured. The rule of 1,000,000 worlds, it stands as the greatest bastion and the hope of humanity. But it has no idea what is coming. Again and again we test its defences. For every of our number that fall, 10 more shall take its place. Every so-called victory is nothing but a doomed attempt at holding back the inevitable. For nothing can stop the tide. So let them try. Let them mount their defences. Let them meet things rally together. They cannot stop us. Nothing can stop the swarm. And they are our prey. Once the Lictor has found its target, it does not stop. It will continue to hound its prey until it is cornered. There is no refuge for its enemies, and once the foe is cornered, they can expect a gruesome end. Hey Legionnaires, so welcome back to the channel. I'm OmegaOnEdge and I hope you enjoyed that intro. So we're actually going to get straight into it, and we're going to start with the palette. So here are the colours I'm going to be using for part 2 of this tutorial. So last time we mainly focused on the exoskeleton, that is like the fleshy part, the bone parts of the armor, but in this time we're going to be bringing in a lot more green into our mixtures. So we really want that brown to slowly start disappearing. However, we still want the underlayer to still show through, and that will create more interest as we go forward. So it will make sense as we continue, and feel free to ask me questions afterwards. Let's go. So I actually start with the tentacles first, and right now I'm just testing my colors just to see how they look on the model. I then start applying a pre-glaze, a prime glaze over the fleshy areas. I don't know what these like arm, talon, mandible things are, but where the spikes are, we get those like beautiful ridges. That's why I start applying the glaze, and you can see how beautiful that is, and how like that can just quickly seeps into all of the edges. A lot of this is experimentation, so like I dollop it in the eye, I play with little areas of the tentacles as well, but all of this is basically to bring out the color and really kind of stand against the bone armor and even the green. But the reason we're using green here as opposed to like another color is because we want there to be harmony between our paints and our colors, and just making sure all of the hues make sense. So we don't want to bring too much attention away from the head. As you continue, this part's pretty easy. It's just applying that glaze everywhere it needs to be. I've opted to put it on the claws, on the tentacles, on the mandible areas I mentioned. Feel free to place this where you want, or swap out it up for another color if you think that's more suitable. I just really like green, as you can see, so I've just started using more of that throughout my pieces. My giant fingers getting in the way again. So I then start applying Pthalo Green mixed with Scroll White. I start applying this onto the model and then slowly and gently dry brushing away. You may notice that as you're doing this, some of that green seeps out because obviously it's still wet. You don't have to leave this to dry. We want it to be harder than the exoskeleton that we painted in the previous episode. However, we still want it to kind of like have it so that, you know, there's still some kind of blood or ichor underneath there that's showing through. I have no idea what color blood Tyranids have. I think it's like purple, black. I know Xenomorphs from Aliens have like green, and then the Arachnids from Starship Troopers have like this really horrible orange ochre blood as well. Yeah, just mix the colours that you think would show through. here I'm applying a slightly warmer green, and that's just to warm up the edges. So again, one side is going to be closer, like a more desaturated bluish green, and the other side is going to be a slightly warmer one. And we'll just keep playing with those colors until we find the one that fits. You can see I'm just kind of smoothing it out, blending what I can, and just continuing to highlight. So because we want these ridges to kind of show through, we want definition, what we're going to do later on is actually apply a pin wash to this area. But for now, we have to keep applying and dry brushing away, I say about 3 times. That way we'll be able to build up that definition without our paint blending on the model as we're brushing. So here I'm applying the paint onto the claws, again onto those areas that we wanted to stick out green. Now you can be a bit more imaginative than this. They don't have to be green, they can even stay as the bone if you really wanted to, or you can make them red. Basically just trying to keep on that warmer side of the color wheel. With oil painting, the main thing is trying to start with the lower value first and then building light on top of it. You don't always have to do this way. For the Space Marine, for example, I think I started with the light areas first and then put the shadows afterwards. But it just depends on where you're trying to bring attention to and the kind of the strength of the saturation and value that you're trying to build towards. So in this case, if we're starting really low, we can build up to brighter as well. But if we wanted to blend backwards and blend into the shadows, then obviously we can start with the brighter color and then blend lower. So here I'm doing a slight kind of glaze over these, I think like the muscle sinew in between, or like these little vent areas. I'm using a bit of Paris red mixed with the sandy yellow, and the reason for doing that is just to kind of bring some warmth. And actually what you'll notice is that we'll start adding more of that deeper red color into different areas of the armor, just to kind of bring in that warmth to different parts of the skin, and then really provide some contrast to the pale green of the top of the exoskeleton. So you can see like the effect that has. It provides a lot of contrast onto the model, makes it a bit more interesting to look at. But below that we still have the purple, so if someone was to twist this around, they would see some parts of orange, some parts of purple, and it just makes it a lot more interesting to look at. So something to kind of comment on about oil painting in general. I was actually very lucky to have an interview by some Golden Demon painters and just very like world-class painters who were just asking me about oil painting, and it's really nice to see the attention oil paints are getting. It's really nice to see that slowly but surely they're making a return. And I think it's just having you guys that encouraged me actually to start this Patreon and encouraged me to start my YouTube channel has really helped me at least feel more confident about speaking out about it. And I've always seen that there's a need for it in this community. There aren't many people who are interested in painting in oils. I think it's just due to a few things. Maybe there's like a lack of experience or a lack of exposure, but every single time you guys comment, it really encourages me, and it actually helps me to keep going with it. And genuinely, I really think that it makes such a difference to our painting, that this medium just makes such a difference, and it just helps to do things that would be very tricky to do in acrylic. So I don't see any downsides of using this, and I'm really glad, so thank you. So there I'm just applying a bit of cadmium lemon mixed with our Pthalo Green, and you can see it's bringing some warmth to the tentacle areas. And I'll do this on the mandibles. I'm just going to call them mandible scything talons. I think that's what they're called in the fluff, onto the models as well. So you can see the warmth that's now bringing onto this side, but it's still quite a cool light because we're sticking to the greeny yellow area. So it's a cool yellow rather than a warm yellow. And yes, I just feel like this makes quite a big difference, and you can see the saturation is brought back into that space. So just use the tip of your brush, very light brush strokes, and just enjoy. If you can, try to keep this in a straight line. Try and make the light follow a line. You can see how the glossiness is kind of guiding me as I continue to paint. So I'm actually looking at where the light is shining and I'm just copying it. So when we mat this down, it will continue to keep that vibrancy because of where we've placed the light. Alright, finally we are on to the chitin, and so now this has had about a day to dry because I think I paused after doing the flesh, the exoskeleton. I actually paused, and I've come back to it the next day. So now but now that this is completely dry, we can start applying a wash, which is a mixture of what is it, the dark brown with a little bit of the Pthalo Green, and this creates a really nice greeny brown color that we can apply to this warmer color. And I think it's actually called brown sienna, so a mixture of brown sienna onto the chitin, which kind of adds a bit of depth and gets into all those crevices, and it also guides us as we start to paint, so we can see like the difference that makes. It shows where the raised areas are rather than it being one value. We now can see where the recesses are, so we can see where we need to keep the contrast and where we can apply more light to improve that contrast and accentuate where the depth is. Don't worry if this gets onto the skin, we can blend that away, but if done well, and it's good to kind of thin this, so I'm just thinning it with spirit. You can also use liquid if you want to do this without interrupting your armor, but liquid dries quite glossy, doesn't dry very matte, so it's something just to be aware of how it will continue to go as you paint the rest of the model. On to the hooves. Tyranids are such strange creatures. Like, they're not bugs. They are bugs, but they're not. They're like more like weird dinosaur monster things. I feel like just Games Workshop just love doing like hooves on their creatures. Like, I don't know if they find feet quite difficult, but they always give them hooves. It's just interesting. I think the hooves are the feet here are one of the things that I found a bit tricky to paint. I don't actually spend too much time on them just because they're going to be covered in the base. I think in the end I end up going back to green anyway, just to keep it in line with the rest of the stuff in the model. My massive hand in the camera. Yeah, it's fine. We just continue doing the same thing for these talons at the top too, but really the focus areas for your model should be the head, the big jutting talons here, and the hand if you can as well, the hand just in front of the Tyranid Lictor, and the base. And the reason we're doing that is because it gives a space for the viewer's eyes to follow. Something I can go into more detail in another video as well when we talk about the fundamentals of oil painting, but I just want to continue building up just showing you guys a little portfolio of what you can actually do when you feel like you've gotten more confident using oil paints. Now we're going to be applying the green onto the armor, and slowly and surely what we want to do, the key part about this and creating that interest, is making sure that some of the brown is still showing through. What we need to make sure as we're blending is that we just leave a few areas of space completely alone, and we're just blending towards the parts that we want to keep the green. So in general, what I try to do is anywhere in shadow, I try to leave alone as much as possible. So for example, you can see there at the tip, there's still quite a bit of brown. I'll probably blend over it, but I'll make sure that most of the pigment will stay towards the front as opposed to that kind of curved area. And the main reason for that is just to keep the contrast. We're not trying to lose the colors. We spent, you know, a little bit bleeding up to those areas and making them down. And we just want that gradual blend towards the light, leaving some areas in brown. We want this paint to be thicker than the layer underneath, and you can see, and then we can just dry brush it around. And what we end up getting is this really nice effect. So that kind of glossiness you see where the highlight is, we can use that to our advantage. And when we get into the later half of this tutorial, you'll see me use that as a guide for the rest of my paint. So I'm keeping certain parts in shadow, and we'll come back to it in a bit. But what we're doing here is just trying to get around the crown. I guess like the crown exoskeleton around the Lictor's chest. And yeah, keeping to the kind of raised areas and leaving the curved and areas in shadow and depth alone. So now you can see me just bringing back some of those colors to the top of the head. It's actually very tricky to film on camera just because the Lictor has those raised areas and they're poking into the camera, so apologies for that. I didn't want to film too far away just because I felt like you wouldn't be able to get the details, so you just have to try and manage around the model you're painting, and if we do paint something larger, it will just mean we'll probably have to try and paint it in sub-assemblies. So now I'm onto the chest, just blending up. This will probably stay lower value. There's an area here that I will leave alone that I won't go into because it's actually quite nice to leave the brown in there as it gets kind of warmer. And this is out of the direct sunlight. So this is actually the green that the Tyranid would actually look like outside of the light. And it's quite nice because you can see now where the top of the crown is, where the light is hitting, is brighter, and that area is more of a mid-tone in the lower section. The brown is still quite strong down there. So hopefully in the last episode you were able to see how the green makes such a difference on that concept art we found, and how you can just be inspired by such a simple piece of art to try new things, and as you're painting you'll kind of discover what you like, and maybe it won't work and you'll have to try something new. But I think with Tyranids, and especially a scheme like this, which, you know, I don't think I've seen before. I think there's something similar in the Forge Rod book I was mentioned, but I think there's still quite a big difference in just particularly in the exoskeleton as well, and the depth in the green, which we're going to add to. So you can see I've added in some hard lines just on the kind of bone area of the armor, on the shin, or thigh rather, the thigh armor, and those highlights are very thick, so what I'll probably do is blend them back and then go over them again. A lot of time is actually spent on this, I guess, this shoulder back armor, just because it's what the perfumer will see when they're holding it. It's like quite prominent, so you really want to spend a bit more time on this section of the model as you build up, and then you can kind of bring that back down for other areas if you want to. Again, this is just for my army, it's not a competition piece, but it is one of my favourite models. It's my favourite character in the Tyranid army, and so I did spend probably a bit too long on this model, but I've enjoyed it, really enjoyed it. I found it so easy with this technique just to continue painting and go over these areas. So now I'm just trying to add some highlights, trying to leave some depth where I can, but just trying to bring in some slight brighter color. And this was with scroll white, and a lot more scroll white into our cadmium green pale that we used here, just to accentuate that. Of course, you can see that one side is still in shadow, and we're going to do our best to keep that just so we have that contrast. So now what we're doing is we're going in with a slight green wash, similar to what we were using before, but what we're going to do is just we're going to focus on this side where we start adding in a bit of contrast to make sure it's slightly different as we begin to work on the head. So taking our dry brush and slowly smoothing away those areas that we've started applying the paint onto to help it speed the drying, and then we're going to work on the opposite side. And right now I'm just adding in contrast, so I'm going in with a bit more shadow, all into the areas where I think the shadow will be, and then we'll go back in with some brighter colors to add some highlight, add some texture, and just start to unify things and bring some attention to the head and to the face in this area. With the head, it's actually really important to take your time as you're working, just as we mentioned before. This is where our eyes as humans are just drawn to the faces of things. As soon as we see something, we'll try to create some familiarity between it, so we'll go straight to the head, and so it's good to try and spend as much time here as possible. Okay, so just going back over, now we've done our blending and we've got our colors in the right place, we can start applying our highlights. And again, this is really cool because we'll start to see all of those effects finally start coming into shape. And we can smooth them out if they're a bit too thick as well. So don't panic too much if you feel like you're going a bit too broad with your highlights. It's actually better to create a larger shape, and then you can shade it down. It's better to go too far than it is to kind of under highlight it, because we'll be able to come back to this straight away anyway. So now we're on to the back, and similar to what we did on the shoulders, we're going to start bringing in those colors. But this is really nice, I think, and very freeing. You don't really have to blend here. You can keep your brushstrokes very loose and very thin as well, and you can see as the color slowly starts to build up over time as we keep going over the area and spreading that oil paint around. This creates a really nice and interesting texture, not a physical texture. We don't want it to kind of get dusty, but what we start to see is with those loose brush strokes from right to left and side to side, we'll start to see a build up of gradual paint. And these overlapping layers just really add to the effect we're trying to create. The Tyranid shell is just so nice because it's got all these extra ridges and all this detail. And to be honest, I was very impressed, like really impressed about how well they've done this work, and how well their artists have kind of accentuated the anatomy of a creature like this and just really making it look like a weird crab insect thing. And you can just see like how we've got some brush strokes in there, we've got some paint that isn't blended, and because we're doing that on the model without having to kind of switch to a dry brush, we're just using our application brush and doing that. It just really adds to those effects. So it's very, very nice, and we get the warmth of the tail against the coolness of the armor as well. So it all just starts working together. And then what I start doing is any of those areas that have a slight more light on them, I start to highlight those areas, but trying to stick to a smaller space. So what I'm doing is I'm making my light areas a lot smaller and a lot thinner than the areas that we applied before. And the reason we do this is just that it kind of brings in that focus to where we want the viewer to look, and we can slowly start blending some spaces together if we feel like it's necessary. And this is what we use to kind of unify all of that work, all of the work we were doing before. And here we go, here we go. Now that I've unified it, I can go in again and then just start blending those spaces together. can see how just layering up like that and then blending back creates that unification. And I'm just trying to highlight all of those ridges. I'm using the side of my brush because I don't mind if it's slightly more spread out, and that's because when we blend it will smoothen out anyway, and then we can go in again if we want to with the tip. But by doing it this way we just create that texture, and also just adding to the depth onto the side of the model. Highlighting is really good just for accentuating. I can see why the Evermetal team do it, and I guess painting this way we don't necessarily have to highlight if we don't want to, but it does add a lot more definition. And I think oils have been known to struggle with definition, but there are ways we can get around that, and obviously ways I've spoken about in my previous video on the Space Marine Crimson Fist. We did a whole episode on hard lines, so be sure to check that one out. But for this you can just see it coming into practice, where it's all about application, smoothing, application and smoothing again, and you're just gradually building up an area step by step to where you need it to be. And everything I'm showing you on this back you can apply to other areas as well if you want to. There we go, here's just me using the tip to kind of bring it out focus into certain areas. And because we've dry brushed, you can see that by how easily we're able to apply over these parts of the model. Really nice thing about painting this way is we can use the same colors that we've used on the armor on the skin, and what that does is it starts to bring and unify everything we've done previously. So all of the work that we had done in the skin in the previous episodes, we can now go in with that same color and use it to enhance those parts. I'm just going to call it skin, the exoskeleton, but I'm just going to call it skin. We can use it to enhance those areas as well. And it ends up just making things look a lot more unified, like they're all being touched by the same light as well. So you'll notice that the crown has a slightly colder green. When I first did this, I wasn't particularly happy with it, so I tried to cool that area down. But it does add some interest to the back of the head. But I think, to be honest, I think it would actually look better if it had just been kept closer to the yellow side. So I might actually go back into this area and fix that if I want to, or just go over it like I would probably do here and just accentuate it a bit more. So now I'm working on the mandible blades, the scythes, on top of the area. You can see how thin that paint is, how it kind of just blends and smoothly rolls onto the armor here. It's actually good to keep your paint quite thin rather than thick here, just because we're slowly trying to gradually build up. We can go and thicker afterwards, and this is actually where like you get to see how versatile oils are. By getting it thin, the thinner it is, obviously the faster it will dry. So what you want to make sure you're doing as you're doing this is that you're taking your time and you're not applying that too hard. And when you dry brush, you want to make sure you dry brush it softly, because what we don't want to do is, if any of that paint hasn't dried properly, you can actually end up removing it if you're not careful. So you want to make sure that the paint underneath is cured, and usually that's why I say I leave it overnight, and then you can build up on top of it with a thinner layer of paint. But scale 75 paints are really fast drying, especially when thinned, and it's one of the advantages and why I really enjoy using that brand of paint, just because it's so effective in that area. And so when I start to highlight, I'm trying to stay clear of the inside of the ridges. You can see as I'm blending, I'm trying to just stay clear of some of the sides. We're actually going to come back in here with a orange and warm this up and just increase the saturation for the overlapping layers. And I actually think here I'm using I'm using a hairdryer, which you can see why it's turning. This is a good way of like speeding up the process, and then when you're done, you can just go back to with your thicker paint and just go over those areas. And I'm actually applying it downwards, following the shape of the model, as opposed to going the opposite direction, because I want there to be a gradual blend into light from the darker green. Now you can see me going in with that lighter green again, just time with a tiny bit more yellow into those areas that we did earlier, and just trying to create a bit more of a focus towards the front, and just highlighting certain areas, trying to keep the volume in the middle, like with the ridges. The idea behind this is that I kind of feel like this would be kind of gooey, kind of like liquidy, glossy, and you can see like the finished result there as it kind of becomes a lot brighter. Now I'm going back into the skin with that same color and just accentuating certain parts. As we continue to dry brush this in the past, you can see that it probably became a little bit desaturated, so this is almost like a second layer for this part of the armor. And you can take your time here, just keep your brush strokes very small and minuscule, and stick into all the areas that you want to bring attention to and highlight here. So like the wrist, the claw, the hand, really making those bony areas of the model stand out as much as possible. And here I just start highlighting towards the back of the armor as well. Now this will actually get dulled down, because I think at this point I felt like it was too bright. And so I'll just take my brush moving. You can see I just take my dry brush and I start to smooth that out. And then I will come back in with another color afterwards, just to start unifying and actually bringing in some warmth. Here is the red, the oxide, the ochre that I mentioned a little while ago in the video. And what this is going to start doing is really adding some warmth and depth to the green armor, and it will make it kind of stand out. Now, this is totally unnecessary, but it's a part of my style that I really enjoy doing, because I just like having multiple colors in the same areas and using some colors to highlight and others to act as a shadow and just bring that depth. It's normally came from the idea of using reflective colors in non-metallic metals, which creates more interest, but old masters were doing this with their more impressionist oil paintings as well, and really like making colors, oh, you can't see because my hand's in the way, but using colors to, rather than black and white, to add shadow to areas and really just add in that depth and increase that interest. We start going in with a pin wash into certain areas of the armor, and we're just adding in contrast and definition. So any areas where, when we were blending, we kind of overtook some of that part of the skin in the previous episode and the armor here, we're just going to go in with a bit of a pin wash and just add back in that definition. So around the eyes, around the skull area, around the little tentacle thingamajigs, wherever they are, we're going to add them back here too. And of course we can go over this again if we do too much, but by doing it this way, we actually just add in some more definition, and any areas that we felt like, okay, actually that's probably too, like that highlight is too broad, or it's not been blended particularly well, we kind of cheat the system here and blend back. So I'm not just using it to put into all the gaps, I'm actually using it to kind of glaze in some shadows and just add in that contrast, so when the person holding it looks from the angle that we've been painting towards the keyframe, they can actually see where all of those shadows were and what we were going for, and the light direction, get a proper sense of the direction that the light, that the Tyranid Lictor is actually facing. And it's just so satisfying to paint this way and to see that oil paint move into all of those ridges. This actually shows you that you don't have to blend everything. It's okay to leave certain areas unblended, particularly on the weird gooey mandible thingamajiggies. And that's just because actually it's quite nice. I like leaving the brush strokes. If you really want to, you can of course blend everything. But I do feel like you'll lose some definition if you paint in that way. However, it's each to its own. I just really like this style that's kind of coming out here and the way this is developing. So you'll be able to see all of these different kind of textures and where I've put my brush and where I've actually just left it underdeveloped for a reason. But just pin washes, that's really fun because it adds in all of that texture and just unifies things, as well as adding in that definition again to the rest of the model and just letting people be in your eyes be able to break up what it's looking at so you can actually understand it. You can see the brown, the green, the purple, all the different colors in there are just adding to the effect. And by painting this way, we kind of make the Tyranid look, you know, it's not like a metal. It's organic. It's what everything weapon is kind of grown from it. So, like, it has to look a bit like grazed, a little bit beaten up, just a little uneven. And by having these textures appear in the model, we're creating that make believe. We're bringing that into the viewer's eyes. Don't ask me why I went for red. I just liked it, if I'm honest. Warming up those areas, I can bring them back afterwards, but I just really liked the warmth. So if someone turns it around, they might expect another color, and then they see that it kind of warms up the view they're looking at. And also, it will make sense when we get onto doing the base, because I use the same colors that I do on the model on the base, and that is what unifies everything and kind of brings everything together. It's actually very good practice to do that, so I'll be looking forward to sharing that part of the tutorial with you as well. So this side is a lot more purple and a lot more colder, and that's just because it's not facing the sunlight. So I've wanted to bring that effect in and just show you actually that there's a few ways you can paint. I've also done, which I forgot to capture on video, but you can see there's that cyan blue area that we spoke about on the tail. I've just copied that from the concept art that we saw and just did a pin wash into those little hole areas to bring that effect out and make the tail a bit more interesting to look at. And I believe I do it on the head as well. I'm actually holding the model right now to make sure. I do it on the head as well. And by doing that, you just kind of create that interest. So here's me just building up a bit of texture on the tail, on the kind of flesh area of the tail. And when I dry brush that out, it will kind of smooth out. But doing it this way, keeping it thick, it will create a bit more texture, a bit more interest. To be honest, I think we could have gone from a different color of the eyes, maybe like a red, because that would really stand out against the greens in there. But at the same time, like, I guess it's also in the cohesiveness of the rest of the colors as well. So you should try like red. I think try go for a warmer one if you really want to bring the attention there. I went for like a yellow green into a dot highlight using white, but feel free to experiment with this part, guys. Now, to be honest, you could spend a lot longer on this model. I think I did. I think I just started highlighting everything or certain areas that I wanted to bring attention to. But I think, to be honest, any more than that for an army is probably overkill. You don't need to go any further than that, and you can just relax and just have fun. The last thing is just bringing attention to the areas that, like the mandibles at the top and the talons at the top, and then just places on the head and accentuating that. And that is the tutorial. So in the next tutorial, we're going to solidify what we were doing by working on the base, and we're going to ground him. So just add a bit more warmth into the underside, and all of that you've seen, all you've done here will make more sense. So I really hope you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you in the next episode. And if you liked the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel, there should be a link in the bio to my Patreon. Thank you to all my loyal patrons, you make this possible. Bye for now.